Good afternoon, Calgary. How are we doing? How was your lunch? Have you met at least 2 people so far? Have you found an accountability partner or an accountability coach? Has that been taken care of? Let me hear by a round of applause. How many of you have found some potential accountability partner, accountability coaches? Applause. You have some work to do, Calgary. You've got some work to do this afternoon. Key insights. How are you doing on your key insights from each of our 3 speakers? The people I had the pleasure to have lunch with today were just amazed with the thought concepts that they've heard so far, and the implementations that they plan are absolutely amazing. And so I'm excited. One of the things that we've learned is that you hear from these thought leaders, and it is amazing stuff, but how do I go about actually making it happen? And that's why we have our executive panel. And what we know is that these executives that we're working with here on the panel today are doing what it is that you're doing. And so they're going to bring to the stage today their answers to some questions that we have for them, which will really help you understand what it is that they're going through. But we also invite you to take a moment to jot down a few questions. We're going to have a few moments of conversation together as an executive panel here, but then we will open it up to the floor to take questions from you for the last 10 to 15 minutes or so. So get your questions prepared. Think about what it is you're going to ask. And joining me here today is Choi, the Senior Vice President, Global Enterprise Systems and Engineering at Dell EMC. Heather Haslam is the Vice President of Marketing at ADP Canada. And Helen Wesley is the Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Enmax. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Thank you. Great. Thanks, Casey. Have a seat right there if you would. First one. You're right there, Casey. Yes, there we go. Heather, you're in a good spot as well. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a little bit of a Cirque du Soleil getting into and out of these bar stools, so we'll see how well you've done well. I can see if I can get settled now. And so thanks again so much for joining us. And maybe if we can start down at the far end, Helen, share with us. Welcome to the Art of Leadership panel. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself and your organization for those who might not be familiar with Enmax?
Sure. So I work for Enmax, and Enmax would have turned these lights on today. Hopefully they'll stay on. Power company in Alberta. And we have both a regulated business, which is the transmission and distribution business, as well as the electricity or power business. And we've got a couple of thousand employees and some additional workforce that goes up and down in nature, but we're primarily Alberta-based. And I have responsibility for all the traditional finance functions as well as corporate development and IT. And other things about me just that are background are that I've worked both in Canada as well as in the States and in England, so had a chance to try out leadership in some different cultures as well.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to finding out then what's it like to be back home again, but we'll maybe dig into those during the questions. So thank you. Thank you, Helen. Great to be with you. Heather, welcome.
Hi there. Thank you so much.
Glad you're here.
Heather Haslam. I am with ADP, which is a leader in human capital management. We get to provide solution to businesses globally, actually, for human capital management across the board, so from hire to retire. And I get to lead marketing in Canada. I've been with the company a couple years, and very pleased to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Casey.
Hey, Bill. How are you?
Great, thank you.
Great to be here with Helen and Heather as well. Choi. I lead our global solutions engineering team for Dell Technologies. This is an organization of just a shade under 6,000 folks that work with our customers globally. Really on making sure that the technology solutions that we're talking to our customers about are supporting their digital workforce IT transformation. So it's really a group of folks that is just maniacally focused on customer satisfaction, making everything works as it should. And I've been doing that now for just about 2.5 years with Dell Technologies, and prior to that, I spent a long time, a little over a quarter century with Hewlett-Packard and HP Enterprise as well. So I've been in tech for a long time.
Good stuff, so we'll look forward to it. And I'm thrilled to hear that you were paying attention this morning to that maniacal focus and the benefits thereof.
I got a lot out of the
professor's
presentation, so yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. So let me open with our very first question to you then, if I could. And maybe, Casey, if we can begin with you this afternoon. Reid Hoffman, co-founder of LinkedIn, has a great quote saying, "No matter how brilliant your mind or strategy, if you're playing a solo game, you'll always lose out to a team." We've come together at the Art of Leadership to have a conversation around strengthening leadership capabilities and ultimately building better teams and organizations. So what do you do at Dell EMC around building the bond amongst the leadership team? How do you do that, and how often and where?
Yeah, so I think I'll start kind of answering this just with kind of my personal journey on this, and then talk a little bit about our teams do it. So I actually joined this organization as the merger was being consummated. This was a $68 billion merger between the largest tech merger that we've seen, between really two powerhouses that were in the industry, but on different ends of the spectrum. And a lot of times, and having seen this at my time at HP, that's kind of a tenuous place, that you typically don't, it's not one of the things that you say, hey, I really want to be a part of that. In most cases, people go, well, it's here, and I'll kind of get through it. But having been through a number of these, I really wanted the opportunity. I believed in the mission of what we were trying to do, which was to create a world-class company across very, very different domains: software, hardware, client systems, networking, cloud services. And the challenge was what fascinated me in doing that. In the tech industry, this has proven to be pretty disastrous over the years. I mean, you can count, for every one merger that goes well, there's probably at least 8 that don't go so well. So this was a challenge to kind of see if that can be done. I will tell you, it's difficult, especially when you're coming at the problem from very, very different angles. We have companies in our portfolio, our family of companies, like Pivotal, for example, in San Francisco. That is, this is a 1,000-person operation, to others that are much larger, more traditional. And getting the teams to think about the mission and what we're trying to solve is difficult, because just our approaches are fundamentally different. A hardware engineer approaches things very differently from the way that you would design code or software for a particular problem. One of the ways that's helped us tremendously on this has been what I would call it's the founder DNA. Michael Dell is still very involved with the business, and there's a difference in being involved or with the business and than actually having imparting really a strong impression on the operational cadence of the business. So we rely very heavily on what I would call some very clear leadership coming from the organization around how we measure mutual customer satisfaction. So in fact, we've actually instituted this as 4 key measures of how everyone in the company is effectively paid. So customer satisfaction, employee NPS, growth, and ultimately revenue. And so that clarity has helped tremendously with organizational differences around how we'll tackle the problem, because we'll always start with that first and then use that as really the North Star to kind of come back towards. But it's been great to have that founder DNA. It's been good to be able to translate it into something that's actionable and measured by the entirety of the business, and not just one particular piece of the business.
Fantastic and great. So it's literally metrics, hard numbered. People can actually see the value and the impact.
Absolutely, and I think we've taken an extra step there in making sure that it's tied not only to compensation, but really how we measure the success of the business in terms of brand and others. So that the piece that I think everybody measures profitability and they measure revenue. The premium that we've placed, though, or the equal premium we placed on employee satisfaction, Net Promoter Score in particular, as well as customer NPS, has been really fruitful for us, because it really gives you that opportunity to use an industry standard measure to judge whether or not you're being an effective organization, and again, driving that sort of cooperation and leadership.
Beautiful, thank you, thank you. Helen, I was actually with ADP for, sorry, Heather.
I've been called way worse.
Well, and you're sitting next to somebody who you're very honored for me to make that mistake. And I projected that because I shared with you backstage. I would probably do that just to be the human that I am. But I was with ADP some 15 years ago. And I remember leadership and bringing leaders together was important to us at both sales kickoff as well as leadership forums thereafter. What's happening at ADP now? Tell us what's happening at ADP in Canada.
So we're still very much doing the leadership forums. So there's ongoing collaboration that happens on a quarterly basis. Yes, the leadership team gets out of the office and has an offsite. And it's not just, those offsites that are, it's work outside of the office. It's often the important stuff that provides the opportunity for people to get to know each other. That is very much happening. What I'll also say, too, is what I'm seeing is real value in when it's not just the leadership team, but it's all levels, right? So when I think about, I just saw this happen where a frontline person in service brought forward a really good idea that also provided a little bit of criticism about another path. and probably wouldn't have had the courage to bring that forward if they hadn't just cleaned up a park with the senior leader that ran that division. And so I think that there's value not just in the leadership team doing those things, but also all levels. I'll share a quick story about an offsite that changed me dramatically and changed the team dynamic. So it was one of the first times that I was at a leadership team. It was a small startup, an application service provider, if you can imagine, back in the day. And I was with this group of guys who were unbelievable. It felt like everything that they did just, turned to gold. They were so smart, and I was intimidated, right? I had that internal voice that said, I don't know, you're really kind of an imposter here, maybe you're not worthy. And we had an offsite, so we went to the head of technology's cottage to just socialize. And when I showed up, it was my first indication that, wow, they're not perfect. It wasn't at all organized. They just didn't know how to organize a party for all intents and purposes. And it was the first time that I was like, oh, wow, these guys who are unbelievable, they're just dudes.
These are tech people, right?
They're tech people, exactly. They don't know how to organize a party. And then later on in the afternoon, it was, hey, let's go water skiing. And so I'm keen, popped up around the lake, zippy-zoo, and then somebody else wanted to give it a go. And he was the head of finance, and he had never water skied before. And despite the fact that maybe it looked easy, it's difficult. And I played a role that day that taught myself that I could help. So I stayed in the water, treaded water for a long time, and coached every step of the way, right? Get the rope between your feet, sit back, pause. What the team realized is that not only could I cheerlead and help them along, but I'm really good at taking big tasks and breaking it down into pieces. And they wouldn't have known that, and I wouldn't have had the confidence that I had when going back on Monday morning. It made a huge difference. All of a sudden, I found my voice.
Wow.
And so I think that there's value in the structural, go into the forest and, those trust tests, but sometimes it's just important to get people together so that you're able to see their strengths, you're able to see their vulnerabilities, and that's when people actually connect.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. So such diverse experiences. Helen, anything different at Enmax?
Not so much different at Enmax, and I think a lot of what's been shared is I would absolutely subscribe to as well. And I think maybe the only thing I'll add is that I think you have to figure out. You as a leader might think that there's a reason for this team to be a team, but until they figure out why they're a team, I don't think you've got much of a hope. So whether it's measures that you all share, or whether it's some kind of common purpose, or a purpose that you actually have to find together. So my most recent example is as a leader of finance, I've got very disparate functions. So I've got people who are doing accounting all day long, and then I've got others who are doing complex analytics and risk management, and others who are working on strategy. And they all have their own views about how they function and what their role in the organization is. And so we were bringing them together for the purpose of strengthening the finance team. And they kind of were looking around and saying, well, why are you here? I'm better than this guy. Those guys are just doing accounting. We're way up here in the stratosphere doing, strategy. And so we had to figure out what it was that they could all benefit from by working on something together. And so we had a few sessions, and it took a while for it to sort of appear, but it ended up being leadership development. And in my mind, all I wanted to do was bring this team together somehow so that we had a more cohesive group that worked with the rest of the organization to deliver what we needed to deliver. And it turned out that it was figuring out that there was community in them and leadership development in them, and then they started being vulnerable with one another, opening up, more conversation happened, and we're in a pretty good place now. Took a while though.
Yeah, the culture adjustments never happen instantly, do they? And then aside from that, there's also the perspectives, the perceptions of people. And so very often people think or talk about leadership as the soft stuff. What are your views on this, particularly as you've progressed into more senior leadership roles now as a CFO?
Yeah, so I actually think leadership is really mischaracterized as a soft skill or something that can be done at, off the side of your desk, or you'll do that later, or boy, that's another thing you've asked me to do. I actually think it's integrated into everything you do as soon as you've got people reporting to you. And I think it's a technical skill. I think it's very complex. It requires a lot of lateral thinking. It requires a lot of forethought and planning, and some could say actual sort of manipulation in the background. I mean, I spend a lot of time plotting to figure out where I can give somebody a development opportunity, or how I can position somebody for a piece of work or for something that they will shine at, that will give them confidence to then be able to show up in a different way and have their voice come out in a different way. And I suppose I think of it as I've got foundational pieces of the puzzle that I do that are my rhythm, the things that are important to me as a sort of a bedrock. So routine, it's very simple and straightforward. It's just consistent, routine one-on-one meetings and then routine team meetings. And those become the things that people can then count on, because I've also learned over time that consistency is something that people really need in leaders. They need to know who they're dealing with. And we're human beings. We're not going to behave consistently all the time, but people need to know what you stand for. So you have to show up like you say you will. So I've learned that because the world is crazy enough as it is, and stuff happens every day, and your day never unfolds the way you thought it would, you need some of those bedrock items. So I'm quite thoughtful about making sure those are happening. And then as events unfold and other things take hold, you sort of have to show up the way you hope you will, according to what you believe in. So all that to say, there's a lot of planning, a lot of forethought, a lot of proactiveness around it from my standpoint.
Beautiful. So what I'm hearing from you is a lot around authentic leadership and really showing up as who you are, but also understanding what our leadership brand is. There's a significant difference between one's intention and other people's perception of you.
Yeah, and I guess one thing that I didn't add that I think is also important is, like any technical skill, you have to keep learning. You have to keep thinking about how you're showing up and did that go the way you wanted it to, and you have to keep asking for feedback and trying to keep getting better, because it's you have to keep adapting the way the people around you are changing.
Mm-hmm. And there's your leadership brand as well. And so speaking of brands, Heather, how do you shape organizational culture from a marketing perspective, if you will, to really elicit strong identification and also a sense of belonging?
Wow, I've got so much running through my head. So first I'll share that ADP is a matrix environment. So even the organization itself has embedded in it, this sense of belonging, because you're a part of so many different teams. So there are pros and cons to matrix environments. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but there really is a pro around that sense of belonging, for sure. I think also, you've just touched on it, is this consistency drives authenticity, right? It's actually about being a role model in the behaviors and everything that you do to help shape what it is that you want for the culture. Every person counts is one of ADP's core values. And so what that actually means is that when you're in an elevator with somebody, you have a connection with them, that you reach out to them. It means that Marina, who cleans the office on the 16th floor where I work, I have a connection with her. There's mutual respect. I understand that her job is very important, and I'm grateful for her role in that. It also means, at the boardroom table, you're not just looking at the most senior person, right? Somebody told me once this idea that the more senior somebody gets, the funnier their jokes. And,
A lot of people are laughing right now.
Yeah. So that's crap.
Yeah.
And it's crap. And so, authenticity in terms of what I try to bring forward is, consistently engaging everybody, providing an opportunity to everybody to have their voice.
And I'll just add too, it's not just within the company, it's actually in your community, because whether you know it or not, your name is out there. I was buying a baby gift a couple of months ago and having a nice interchange with the lady at the Pottery Barn Kids, and And I went to pay, and she said, "Oh, you're Helen Wesley." And I said, "Yeah, what's on my credit card?" Yep. She's a part-time receptionist at Enmax. And I can guarantee you, if I had been not nice to her, if I had been cranky, then that would have gone like wildfire. So it's not just, as you say, in the hallways and the elevators and everything else. It's that the more senior you get, the more people actually, have their eyes on you. So.
And so, Casey, a question for you, given what we've just had shared in regards to this, is how does diversity factor or not factor into leadership actions and methods?
Yeah, this is one that's pretty close to me because I've had in my career been a diverse leader just because of my background. I was actually I emigrated to the States in '72. English was not my primary language. My first language was Korean. And, part of it's just a natural shaping of the experience of who I am. I can't, dissolve that out of my background. But when I got into tech, one of the things that became pretty obvious to me as someone of Asian descent was the fact that you had a lot of folks that were in technology as Asians in my case, but you didn't see that many in leadership roles. So a lot of this got me to be personally curious in terms of, is someone giving me the benefit of the doubt, or frankly giving me, some advantage that is because of who I am, or is it based on my merits? And so that question always kind of runs through your head as you progress. But it put me in a situation where it first of all, I think, forces you to look at this. And I think a lot of times, I'm not sure people naturally gravitate towards diversity because it's something that's, just something that comes naturally. I think it's something that, you're either taught via a class or something else that comes up. But as I got into it more, it became really a key passion of mine in understanding what are the outcomes of diversity versus just talking about it. And I'll give you just one quick example here. I just got back about 3 weeks ago. I have a large shared services team in Cairo, Egypt, and it's about almost a 300-person operation. And it's grown tremendously in the last year, and I haven't gone back. And this time back, I knew it was already a fairly diverse organization, in this case, gender diversity. And at that time, it was about 40% women and about 60% men. And keep in mind, this is in an Arabic country, right? So again, keeping that factor as part of the backdrop. Going there this time, I found that the ratio had actually shifted from 40-60 to 60-40. And a lot of it had to do, and at the same time, the employee net promoter score had gone up from somewhere in the low 60s, which is already fantastic, into 98, and it's the highest one that we have in the company. And as I try to figure out what's creating this, what came really into sharp focus was that and just talking to folks about what brought you here, especially the women, it was really around, again, seeing others that are in those archetype roles, right? Seeing that community. And in fact, when I talked to the men that were hired, it was almost the same impact, except in saying, God, I really wanted to work for a company that had this opportunity for this sort of merit-based meritocracy that was already a part of the culture. So as I've dived into this in my time, it's really been shown to me that this is, at least for me, it's more than just about, it's nice to see different genders or different ethnicities. It really has significant business outcome, because you can tie those metrics back to very specific things around retention, hiring, the purposefulness of the individuals that are there. So it's been proven to me over and over again that this is more than just about having the right statistics. It's really about, again, an outcome-based derivative coming out of diversity. So that's how it's kind of informed me, at least. I mean, it's both that social commitment and just the right thing to do, but it's proven to me, at least, that there's really strong business outcome ties to that, both on the gender, ethnicity, ability, diversity of thought that was mentioned as well. It's just fantastic to see. And again, I just wanted to share that out because it's just something that sometimes you don't tie the two together, but for me it's become fairly clear.
There we go. Well, thank you. And knowing a bit about the profile at Enmax, Helen, I'm wondering if you want to share anything with us about your sort of senior leadership team's makeup.
Yeah, so probably helpful to know from my perspective, until almost 3 years ago, I was the only woman on any leadership team that I was on. So I grew up through chemicals, commodity chemicals with Nova Corporation, Nova Chemicals, and Petro-Canada in the upstream and the downstream. And when I lived in England, I was the only woman on the leadership team there in the international operations, same at Talisman, and then came to Enmax, where I forget the numbers actually. It's easier to count the men because there are only 2 of them than the women. And we have 4 or 5 depending on how you count who's on the team. But it's a very, very different environment than what I've spent most of my career in, and I suppose what I think about most of the time is that I don't think about it, which is nice. And I got to the point where I learned very much that if you come into every meeting thinking that you're the only woman, that is a sure disaster. It's a recipe for disaster. You're just sort of setting yourself up for a bad conversation or a bad way of thinking, or you're thinking about differences instead of similarities. So I learned, I learned how to be successful in that environment. The environment now is just, I would say, from a business outcome standpoint, it's very productive, very constructive, and most of the other meetings I have in the company are the obverse. I'm the only woman, and there are lots and lots of men, because as you mentioned, Casey, it takes time for these kind of patterns to change in the organization. I do want to mention one thing, though. Casey was talking about the successful outcome of diversity, and this, not that I'm going to come at it from a negative standpoint, but if you haven't figured out who your people are and how they're diverse, the business outcome can be the opposite. So I had a team in Germany who was very used to being told what to do. So these were managers and directors who, the way I would have led them from a Canadian standpoint is we would have together decided where we were going to go, and then they would go, and then I'd come and check in with them a couple weeks later. And so I tried this approach with this team, not knowing that I had this circumstance. So I tried my sort of Canadian approach with this German team, and did the first check-in call. No progress, no nothing in 2 weeks. And I said, so what's happening, guys? I thought we agreed where we were going to go. And they said, well, you didn't tell us what to do next. And that was a shocker for me. That was a huge realization that I had missed a major element of leading diverse teams. I hadn't figured out how they worked. I knew how I wanted to work. I hadn't figured out how they worked. So, you could let something like that go on for months without understanding what the cause and effect was. So.
And then we learn, and so if you think about it, Helen, Heather, I'll come to you first. The 2 H's is what's tripping me up. So Heather, I'm coming to you next. And so the art of communication is the language of leadership. I don't think anyone would disagree that effective communication within your organization enables each individual to perform better, as Helen's just shared with us, and have a higher probability of reaching their potential. With that being said, what systems and processes are in place at your company, at ADP, to support positive dialogue amongst your people and give everyone a voice?
Sure. I'll start with the technology, because we have a couple of great tools that we use internally. So one of them is called Compass, and it's a 360 tool that, based on the feedback, provides you coaching. But that really undersells it, because the real value is that the coaching is shared with your leader and with your team, and actually creates this opportunity for the ongoing dialogue about what's working. So, hey, I just clued in to the fact that I was leading this German team based on how I wanted to say, and now I'm going to try to shift that. Actually working with the team to understand, okay, I've made this shift. Is that having its impact? So that's one tool, Compass. We also have Standout, which is part of the awesomeness that came from an acquisition of the Marcus Buckingham company. And this is a tool that is strengths-based, so through an assessment you find your top strengths. that's shared. But the real value is, in addition to kind of knowing what people's strengths are and to how to leverage that, there's a technology for a weekly check-in. So on a weekly basis, again, I've alluded to the fact that I'm in a matrix environment, so I kind of have 2 different leaders and multiple teams, some that don't directly report to me. But through this system, we have a, what did you love? What did you loathe? What do you need help with? What are your top priorities? I have to know what my top priorities are to communicate them, so it really drives focus. So I would say there's technology in place. And then in addition to that, I'll go a little old school and I'll share, the cadence of twice a year doing stay interviews with people, right? The simple idea of not waiting for somebody to be heading out to sit down with them and ask them, hey, what is it that's motivating you to stay here? What is it that you need? What is the development that you want? What are the things that you would change about the place? What are the things that we're going to change about the place? So having the cadence of doing things like that, which are not technology-based, but just provides the opportunity for communication, I think is key. And then thirdly, this just kind of started organically in our team. We're doing this Friday email. This is like how simple the answer is, right? It's an email to the team on a Friday, and it seems to start from somebody different each week that says, this was the best part of my week. And sometimes it's a business-related thing. The business case got approved, or we launched a product, or we made X number of sales, whatever that is. But in addition, I'm getting through those communications a team dynamic that we're sharing, what we're really proud of. It's about positive communication, right? There's also some of the personal stuff, right? Jason's really into hockey. Derek's son just made the honor roll. Zara finally set her wedding date. So those things are coming out as well, and it's a little more of a loosey-goosey tool, but I'll tell you, I look forward to those Friday emails, and I feel much more empowered coming Monday morning to get together because I know what those successes are from people. Go ahead, Casey.
Great stuff, Heather. I mean, adding one more thing on the tool side, because we've been trying to figure this out, and as kind of resident geeks like we are at the company, we said, well, is there something out there that would help this? And what drove it was when we surveyed our leadership, one of the key characteristics that came back, in fact, it ranked twice as high as our next characteristic, was this ability to the art of the story, right, and communication. How do you communicate effectively? And so we went out and started to look at the market for various tools and methods to help us as well. And one area where AI and machine learning has advanced quite a bit is in this space. So we partnered with a company actually down in our corporate headquarters in Austin that has developed a set of algorithms that actually, what they've done is they've benchmarked the top Fortune 500 CXOs. So they've taken parts of their video, their written communication, their spoken communications, and they've analyzed for effectiveness, gravitas, humility. It could be humor. It could be a variety of factors. And now what they're using that for is the ability for you to benchmark yourself against this base set of known good communication experts, if you will, at that level. And this is just done by you recording yourself both on audio and video, and then analyzing this. And it's helped us out. It's a little scary where this is going, but it's machines helping us be better humans, right, from a communication perspective. But it's again, it's not the only thing, but it's becoming a core part, just like. Autonomous drive is not going to take over for us, taking the wheel, but it's complementing kind of what we can do in the art of communication, and it's helping to amass a lot of information to inform on that. So there are efforts like that going on as well that we're using both old school as well as kind of new school technologies to kind of help our teams become more effective communicators.
Beautiful. Helen, what's happening at Enmax?
Well, so Bill, part of your question was a question about how to get all voices heard.
Yes.
And I think the voice that often doesn't get heard is the voice that's perceived to be negative, or the voice that's questioning, or the voice that's challenging. And I, be curious with the folks in the audience when you get together for a town hall, what's your modus operandi for getting questions from the audience? In my experience, it's mostly been bits of paper, or now using technology, it's typing in a question. It is just terrifying to stand up in front of a group and ask a question that you think is controversial. And I guess I'm trying to move us, in my environment anyway, into a culture where people can ask challenging questions. And they're asked respectfully, obviously, but asked in a way that enables other people to hear why they want to know the answer. Usually when somebody has a tricky question, they're not the only one with that tricky question, and you help everybody else out by surfacing it. The elephant in the room gets called out, whatever the case may be. But there's a lot embedded in a culture that prevents people from asking difficult questions. So I guess, on an ongoing basis, I'm trying to do it, and I'm trying to do it in a more grassroots way first, starting with smaller sessions of 15 and 20 people, making it safe to ask controversial questions. And then, we had an IT function recently, and there was one fellow who just kept asking fantastic questions. And, you could see people around thinking, okay, am I going to sort of move on to the next guy, or make him feel uncomfortable because he keeps asking these great questions? And so after about 3 of them, the third one I didn't answer very well. I said, clearly we're at the point where you and I need to talk, because I'm not getting good at answering your questions anymore. But fantastic to have that kind of engagement. And then people see that, and then it becomes safe, and then hopefully it'll keep going. But I think sharing the good stuff is great, but also figuring out how to get people courageous enough to tackle the difficult stuff is important.
Leadership courage is so important, right? I mean, we'll hear from Alan Mullally this afternoon, and so looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are based on his talk and what you're sharing with us. But, we cannot fix problems we don't know exist, so we need to get that tough talk out on the table. Heather, it's no surprise that leaders are talented, introspective and experienced professionals in their respective fields. However, they're also quite busy, and at times can get distracted with the day-to-day, similar to other associates, if you will, within the organization. As a leader in a global organization, how do you take a step back and evaluate your blind spots and knowledge gaps in a way to sharpen your own axe or saw, if you will, and not just that of others? So how do you focus on yourself?
My grade 9 math teacher commended me for being very communicative about when I was not getting it. So is apparently quite clear. And it was the Meet the Teacher, the first one. It's actually probably around this time of year. And she thanked me because she said that was very helpful for her. She understood that I wasn't getting something wasn't clear, and that there was probably somebody else, in the group as well that didn't get that. So, post that meeting, I was putting up my hand saying, yeah, don't get it. Sorry, I need this explained another way. And so I share that because I think quite early on, formative years, I got comfortable with admitting that I don't get it sometimes, right? I don't understand it. And so I allow myself to dive in. I don't have an ego about not getting it. I ask the same question a number of times. And I'm up for admitting that. And I think based on that, I've been able to surround myself also with some people who will give me the goods. So, I've got people that respectfully give me feedback and, give me insight that maybe I'm not seeing. I often think about, feedback, whether or not it's formal or even right after a meeting. Sometimes I've had some stuff that's been difficult to internalize. Some of it, I recall in particular, required some wine to really be able to listen to. But I think that there's inherent value even when it's hard, right? So having that ability to be up for that feedback. And I think that it provides me with, help with leading, because people see me seeking that and being up for the admitting that I'm not getting something or that I'm not perfect. And they see, that understanding, that idea of the difference between what my intention is and what the impact is, right? And so I'm often checking. All I know is what my intention was. And I'm not sure if I got the cues from everybody about what that impact was. So I'm checking in with folks. And having that language and that openness, provides me with sometimes too clear of a mirror, or, to sharpen the axe as an expression. But I think being open to it, seeking it, is certainly helping me.
I mean, that leadership vulnerability, the leadership courage to have the vulnerability to admit what you don't know, what you're not good at, and having the courage to ask people that have the strength to step forward to do that. The diversity of that team and their skills is a brilliant opportunity, but also that vulnerability now creates that safe environment that I heard Helen talking about, to say, okay, I've seen someone show me it's okay to admit the biggest mistake. It takes me back to, how many people in the room, just a show of hands, have actually terminated someone's employment, fired somebody? Raise of hands. Oh, wow. Okay, so we've worked with some pretty challenging cases. Yes, well, okay. But I mean for performance issues, not for necessarily business issues. So to be clear, can we maybe re-clarify? Let's resurvey that. Thank you, Helen, for reminding me. So you've literally terminated somebody for performance. You fired them because they were a bad performer. Let's do that survey again. Okay. So fair enough. There's still quite a few hands. There's still a lot of bad performance. And when we terminate these people, we know their performance was bad because we've gone through a number of steps to get to that termination. But what's amazing is 2 weeks after, and we find out it was much worse than we ever imagined. And then, I take it back to, how does that happen? And so what I find is that as children, if you remember when mom told you, don't run in the house, don't roughhouse in the house, you're gonna break something. And sure enough, we break mom's favorite vase. And what do? We hide it. We fix it. We blame somebody else. We hide it. We learn that from a very early age. And so to your point, Heather, what I encourage leaders to do is to open up a regular monthly team meeting by sharing the biggest mistake I made last week was, and tell them what that mistake was. And then aside from that, to really focus on a growth mindset, to say, and here's what I learned from it. And so where we're creating a culture where it's okay to admit I've made a mistake, so long as it's a learning opportunity, and now what are we as a team going to do to make that even better? So Casey, knowing that we're talking here about effectiveness and talking about leadership effectiveness, how does your organization and company quantify the outcomes of quality leadership?
I think I've touched a little bit on this, Bill, but I'll come back to it. And we've really tried to, number one, there's so many metrics you can use, right? It could be around, what's your turnover, what's your hiring, speed of hiring, or your candidate funnel. There's a lot of things that are indicative of it. I think first and foremost, we really had to get to what's most important to our stakeholders, which is really our customers and our employees, right? And so we came back to these measures around Net Promoter Score, which again, it's a little bit controversial. I'm not sure it's widely adopted in the industry, but we decided that it was going to be a factor. And the way that NPS works, right, is you effectively, everyone that's kind of on a scale of 1 to 10, everything that gets rated in the mid-section, right, like good, I'm okay, it's fair, that doesn't count, right? What you're really looking at is your detractors and then your followers or your avid promoters, right? And that's how you're determining the score. And so this became really a way to standardize, and I think that's important because you want to have leaders having the same baseline of what we're talking about, and that became critical. The other piece for us was looking at how much of a difference do leadership characteristics make. So we at the company actually identified kind of 7 traits of leadership, and some of them included some things that weren't necessarily real obvious ones, but became something that we've noted in our organization works for our culture. So, for example, humility. This was one that sometimes in a high performance technology culture, it's not necessarily the one that may stick up very high. But when we took a look at these, we noticed that if a leader excelled in just one category, that there was a 27-point difference in employee Net Promoter Score. And there was not as high, but almost equivalent on the customer side. So this translated to improve retention, lower turnover, employee productivity. There's so much goodness that came out of it. So we went back on this whole notion of just be good at one, right? Because just if you can just influence one instead of trying to be a super person around all 7 or 3 or 4, kind of the obsessed with less again kind of concept, it made a big difference. So the first year as a consolidated company 2 years ago, we kind of set on this mission of just one, right? Just pick the one that you are known for. What are you famous for? And just let's hone in on that and improve that particular characteristic versus trying to improve it across the board. And we've had a lot of success with it. Again, going back to this sort of continual improvement and continual measurement. So it worked for us, but again, it's you got to understand that culture. It's no good picking 7 if 4 of them don't apply to your company, right? Pick the ones that are right adjectives for your organization, and then like I said, the Just One campaign for us really made a huge improvement, especially when, again, keep in mind, we went through a major merger acquisition where you lose a lot of people. A lot of brain drain typically happens for good or for worse at that time. So again, we had very positive outcomes from looking at that from that less is more perspective.
Singularity of focus. Yeah. Yes, we've heard it today. So I'm going to bring one more question to the panel, and then I'm going to come out for audience Q&A. So be prepared for that. I'll open this up to anyone who wants to take this on first, but the speed of business today demands that companies become even more agile, resilient, secure, and innovative. How has this impacted your organization, and what are you doing to future-proof your position and ultimately grow in an increasingly more complex business landscape? Thoughts about that?
Okay, I'll jump in.
Thanks,
as the
Heather.
marketer. I'm married to a history teacher, and he tells me all the time that history repeats itself. And so that's the value in going back and looking at what happened to understand, hey, can we predict the future? But it's never exactly quite so, right? It's never exactly the same. And so I'm not at all suggesting that we shouldn't look at backwards at the data, what has happened, what's happening. Because there's tremendous value in that. But the thing that we're doing a lot more of is actually more of the qualitative. So we're getting out with clients and observing them, looking over their shoulders to see, okay, what is it that you're doing? Why this step? How could it be more effortless? What's required for you to do this? And that's bringing tremendous ideas back, to be honest, right? I always think of that, probably it was a group of designers that, the Ford, you put the foot under the,
the tailgate?
I don't know what's called, open up the tailgate lift, perfect. What a day those designers had, right? Like, that's an awesome innovation. It's this little thing that was brought forward. And that likely didn't happen with, a pile of designers looking at how the storage worked inside of the van. They watched users in their world using their products and services to get that idea. So, again, I won't take away from data and looking backwards, but I would say, doing field trips. We're doing field trips. So we have field trips mandated where we're getting out of our inbox and we're going and spending time with clients, whether or not that's on a sales call, whether or not that's, doing an implementation kickoff call, sitting in the call centers, listening to clients. I'm finding tremendous value in not just little ideas, but big ideas through that really qualitative observation.
Wow.
And I would just add, I think one of the things that's happening at the moment is the word innovation or innovative is being used everywhere all the time. And it's quite scary to some people because they think that, oh, I'm not innovative, I'm not creative, I can't do this. And so part of what I think is important is to actually help people understand what they're doing every day already that's innovative. If you're somebody who's intent on continuous improvement, no doubt you are already thinking in an innovative way. So it's trying to unleash some of the people who have a skill that they maybe don't recognize that they have and put them to work in some of these think tanks and ways of solving problems slightly differently. Because again, it's, you know, usually if you sit there and look at something for a really long time, it's not going to cause it to be something different. It's you stumble upon a lot of these inventions, and sometimes it's without trying too hard directly to solve a certain problem.
Beautiful. And it's almost, I'm hearing necessity is the mother of invention. Watching people try to put their groceries into the back of their vehicle and not being able to do it, with all the dogs eating all the good meat. I'm also seeing the full circle where the benefit of bringing all of our leaders together and all of our people together is to really understand what are the challenges they're facing right now, and how can we talk about, get a good conversation going around, how can we solve some of those problems. So let's see how much leadership courage you have right now. I'm about to open it to this audience for any question they have for you, and so let's hear what they would like to know about. Are you ready? Where am I going first? Who's got the very first question before I head down? Oh wow, a few. I'm coming down front.
This question is for Helen. Helen, if you had to quantify, you know, the plethora of challenges that you would have experienced working in a foreign country, as a takeaway, what would have been the biggest thing that you wish you would have known about beforehand, you know, barring the experience with that German situation there? You know, just for those of us that may encounter situations where we're now being, you know, expected to work outside of our conventional norms that we live amongst right now.
Okay, that's a very interesting question, because it actually was probably the most challenging and most interesting 4 years of my career. So I went over to London as the VP of Finance for Petro-Canada's international operations. And at that point, I think we were in 12 or 13 different countries, some of them not in such great shape anymore, Libya and Syria, to name two. And when I got there, the fellow who had been the VP Finance had done the equivalent of retired 2 years ago, but kept coming to work. I think everybody's probably familiar with that circumstance. You know, the biggest joke was how many hours a day was I going to read the Financial Times, because I had a record to beat with this fellow. And that was because we had taken over another company, and he was at the end of his career, and timing was such that he just hadn't been looking into the future. And when I got there, we were on the brink of 2 major exploration contracts just about to come to fruition. And, you know, you got to be careful what you wish for. They both landed at the same time, and off we went. So we had to build organizations in very developing countries, and I just had stuff coming at me left and right, and I have an unfortunate knack of being able to see everything that I think needs to be improved. So I had a very, 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 very long list of things that I thought need to be improved, and I was sort of suffering under the weight of that after about 3 months of inventorying all this stuff. And I went in and I had a chat with my boss, and I was telling him about the 45 things, and I could just tell something was going to come. And long story short, first of all, I ended up in a puddle of tears because I was very, very stressed. I was stressed because my husband had left his job for us to move to England, and he hadn't, you know, properly settled in yet. The kids were in new schools. We had no support system. And there were these 45 things that I thought I needed to fix. And this man, who to this day is one of the best people I'll have ever worked for, said, you know what, I want you to come back tomorrow, and I want you to have 3 things that you're going to focus on. And I said, no, there's no way. There's 45. And he said, no, I want 3. And so I really respected him. So I went home and thought, you know, between my tears and the wine and the debriefing of how the hell am I going to show up there tomorrow after I was in the crying corner in the office today. And I thought, okay, I trust and respect him. I will find 3. And I did. And what was fascinating to me was actually how simple they were. And the first one was get my management team in order. So I had a very disparate group. Some were in Germany, some were in England, and half of them were keepers and half of them weren't. And so I thought, if I get that right, if I concentrate on that, so many other things will fall as a result of that. And I think I think in the challenge that I had there, you know, sort of germane to your question, is the complexity that comes with international operations or going to work in a completely different environment. And you can get pretty staggered, I think, by all of the differences. And so, again, I had to come back to, okay, what's the same? What's the same? What don't I have to worry about? And then where there are differences that I don't understand, well, I just dropped in from nowhere yesterday. Everybody else was managing all of this just fine without me, so clearly they know what's going on. So then I had to remind myself that there were people who could help me, who I just needed to turn to, who I needed to kind of make sure were part of my, my arena, I suppose, in figuring out how to move forward. So lots of questions, lots of really thinking about who you've got doing what and what makes them tick. I mean, that was my other big learning, is what motivates a North American is incredibly different from what motivates somebody in the Middle East. And so you can't change that. That is the way they are. So figuring out how to work with that is what the art is. But I would say it was, like I said, it was one of the most formative times. I would do it again in a heartbeat. So if you have a chance, grab it. It's a huge learning opportunity. And, make sure you've got a good stock of wine.
Panel just right ahead of you here.
Hi, this question is for Heather. You had a really interesting idea, the stay interview. How would you ensure that that's candid discussion and people feel safe doing this interview?
I'll go back to part of that coaching that I try to give to myself around consistency of approach. I'm candid and upfront, and as long as I treat it as a safe environment, before long, others will know that it's a safe environment. So, at a basic level, I take people out for coffee, and get outside of coming to my office with, on the senior leadership floor. I try to remove that. But I would say I do it with integrity. I find sometimes it takes, 2 or 3 of those before I'm getting those really tough questions or that really good insight from folks. But it's as simple as, I mean it. This isn't a whole pile of preparation. Let's have a candid conversation. There are no promises. If you bring up everything, I can't commit to solving all of it, but I can't solve what I don't know about. And, this is a one-to-one conversation. And I treat that conversation with respect. And again, sometimes it takes folks time. But I think just approaching it with the real integrity of, hey, we want this to be even better. And you need everybody's voice in making it better. So listening, I would say, and creating trust.
Just a little further back.
Yes, my question is for KC. You spoke about the importance of diversity and the value in diversity. I'm also an executive vice president and COO of a company here in Calgary that has over 60 countries represented in our 1,500 strong workforce. I'm curious if you could share how you get so many diverse cultures to come together and find common foundations to work together when they come from so culturally, ethnically, and in many other ways, very different backgrounds, but have to find a common focus and a common purpose.
Well, thank you, God. I thought we had a big, diverse organization, but you've got one too. And I think a lot of us do, both whether it be around nationalities or cultural differences or where we do business. I'll go back to, I think first and foremost, what I've noticed that was somewhat different in my kind of two and a half years in now with kind of 2 large organizations, and it's not to pit one against the other, but just some differences maybe, is I think first and foremost, it's the recognition that there needs to be a set of things that is driving the purpose of the organization, that you're never going to get 100% agreement in terms of, saying, hey, that's exactly why I come to work and I'm passionate and I have purpose for what I'm doing. But I think the company did a pretty good job of saying, we, being a big company, a leader, in the technology field, what are we going to do with it, right? Are we out there just to go IPO or, make money or, conquer, new domains? It was really around going back and saying, what purpose does this serve on a long-term basis? And I don't think this is something that you make up. It's something that has to be genuine to the fabric of your organization. And what I mean by genuine is there has to be examples of where this is being applied, right? So the proof is in the application in our case. And so I think where it started to bring these diverse cultures and thought processes and even skills, right? Because I use one of the hardware software kind of diversity, was, we went to this whole purpose of driving human progress. Technology is there. There's a lot of it going the other way, right? Saying, hey, technology is going to take over and it's apocalyptic, and there's this vision of it being used for a different purpose or seeing it turn out in a different way. We choose the other piece of it and saying this is there to drive human progress. And we're going to see that in multiple examples of how we apply it. And again, showcasing it, talking about it. We just had an example the other day here with Nature Fresh in Canada, over in Leamington, I believe, out in the Ontario province, where we're using the technology to produce better quality fruit, to be more productive, to be healthier, to do it in such a way where we can feed more people for less money, right? So it becomes really clear on what that mission is. And we use examples of that at the company to really showcase where instead of more of a gloom and doom, this is going to take your job, robots are going to take over sort of a scenario, which some of that's going to happen, but we want to focus on what is going to be something that is a rally cry for the entire organization. And we were fortunate enough to have, I think, leadership in the organization, a founder, as well as enough experience in this to look on the glasses half full side of it. And I think that attitude has a lot to do with bringing the organization together. So again, I don't think it takes a whole litany of things. I think it's one or two things that the organization says, yeah, we believe in that, we're going to go for that, and transcends the barriers that you would naturally have from culture or other things.
Maybe we are more alike than we are different sometimes. Who really knows? So we've been touching on organizations' leadership practices in ways in which we can move our businesses forward. So in a word or two, if you will, and Casey, Heather, and Helen, I'll ask in this order. In a word or two, for you personally, what are you most proud of?
It's really easy for me. It's the people. It's and what they've accomplished. To me, that's what gets me going, keeps me going. 30 plus years in tech. I love the tech. It's fun, it's geeky, it's great. But I love what we're doing with it and seeing people make great careers and great contributions through it. So,
thank you. Heather, what about for you? What are you most proud of?
Most proud of? Most proud of the fact that I've been up for giving it a go, right? So trying stuff, whether or not it's one of those projects that people don't want to touch or a new role. I've been up for trying it. That we heard earlier, this idea of failure, and I think learning's just a better term for failure. And I think about it that way. So even when I'm stressed and freaking out, I'm thinking about what's the academic eye telling me right now that I'm going to get out of this, and that's going to make me better. Even if it falls flat, I'm going to get something out of this. And so I think, the thing I'm most proud of is trying.
Thank you.
Yeah, the boogeyman for me is the fear of not trying. That's the boogeyman.
Thank you. And Helen?
Mine would be similar to Casey. I think it's when you can look around you and know that people have done way more than they ever thought that they were capable of doing, and you played a role in that somehow. And over time, what happens is your role is less and less direct, and they've internalized whatever it is that you hopefully have transferred to them. But it's seeing people do really, really well.
Yeah. So that limitless human potential, if you will.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we can't think straight if we've got a whole bunch of barriers that we're, filtering all the time. And so, a leader can play a big role in getting rid of some of those barriers for people, and then that's when they shine.
Beautiful. And so my leadership mantra has always been, how can I eliminate the need for my own position so that I can then strategically figure out what mountain we're going to climb next with a singularity of focus. So Calgary, I hope you've had a great opportunity to eavesdrop in on a conversation of 3 executives that are here to share with you their experience. So please join me in thanking our executive panel. Thank you. Thanks so much. Heather, Helen, thanks so much. My pleasure. Thanks, Helen. Good to see you again.